Hello, everyone. My name is Shreyas Pradeep, and this is my Do Something and Report It project for BBE 1201. We're doing a home energy audit. Now, there's lots of moving parts to a home energy audit, so let's just dive right in. Starting with where I was doing the audit, it's back home during spring break, with my parents and my younger brother. It's a nice big suburban home, so I was expecting some pretty big numbers in terms of energy usage. And I got a hold of that energy bill for January of this year and extrapolating that data, I found that my household uses about 16,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is a lot of energy, more than maybe the typical average you might find, such as this EIA data for single detached family homes in the Midwest. We're expecting around maybe 10K. But like I said, it's a big home and my family uses a lot of tech, so it's nothing too surprising. Now, the energy bill didn't include a breakdown, so again, I had to use some survey data. And no surprise, space heating, water heating, air conditioning, they all take a lot of power. But I was more interested in auditing the other part, maybe some devices that don't need to be turned on so often. So just getting some background numbers to see if my numbers are going to line up later on for comparison. These are the devices that I'm going to measure, and here's some, typical energy usages. But again, we have to come back to these after I present the audit information. So first, we got to collect the data using a kilowatt meter. Well, the first device we actually didn't have to use a kilowatt meter because it just says so right here. It was a 14-watt LED in my bedroom. I used a post-it note to track my usage over the week every time I turned on and off the light, and I recorded the times, and that gave me the total amount of time the light was on. Next device was a treadmill down the basement. I like to get my steps in. Here's the kilowatt meter recording one session, and I would take a picture of the device after each time I used it, so I know how long I used it over the course of the week. Space heater, another variable power draw device. I turn it on right before going to bed and then turn it off right after waking up. So I use my phone to track how long I slept. It was a pretty big number for the space heater. Similar deal for the humidifier in terms of tracking usage. It was just when I was asleep. So I plug it in and forget about it overnight and then come back and turn it on or turn it off. Coffee maker, it's a pretty low tech coffee maker, so it's just a quick 5 minute cycle, pretty low power draw. And I just tracked how many pots were made over the course of a week. Phone charger, I plug it in at night. So that's just one cycle per night. It didn't draw too much power, and it's only charging for two about 2 hours. The Amazon Echo was actually not turned on a single time in my household, so it was just a constant power draw, and no one was using it. Same deal with the alarm clock radio. I used to use these to wake up back in middle school, but now they just sit around the house drawing some constant power and probably not even set to the right time. Anyway, putting that all into a time log, I'd like to note that it's pretty uniform usage over the course of the week, and also that the only time I had to ask for other people's input was for coffee. Me, my mom, my dad, we each made one pot per day, but everything else was just my own usage. I made sure to pick devices that either no one was using or only I was using. So before we can plug that all in, we have to do some calculations. The light bulb's pretty easy. We know the wattage rating. We know how long it was used, so we can figure out kilowatt hours per day. For a constant power device like the Amazon Echo, again, we just have that one constant measurement. And in this case, it was on 24/7, so even easier to calculate kilowatt hours per day. Something like the space heater, we have to first calculate the average power. So like say 8 hours or a little over 8 hours while I'm sleeping, I measured this number. So that gives me the average kilowatt hours per hour. And now I know how many hours I used it by measuring, so I can get kilowatt hours per day. Cycle power, pretty easy. We measure how much energy is used in one cycle, and then the cycles per day to give us kilowatt hours per day. Plugging that onto the data table, it's nice and pretty to see. I will note that the only phantom power draw came from the humidifier and the treadmill. Honestly, those numbers were kind of negligible compared to their active use time in terms of energy draw. But let's make some conclusions with that data in a little prettier format. Um, as we can see here, obviously the smaller devices can add up in terms of energy usage. And I was expecting actually a lot of these to have higher energy usages, especially like the treadmill. But addressing the elephant in the room, that space heater, I gotta control my usage here. That was considered over 90% of my energy use. And if I just locked in and put on a hoodie instead of heating up my room to 74 degrees, it'd be a lot easier to manage my personal energy usage. Now, comparing back to the averages that I collected at the beginning, everything was pretty much in line again, except for the heater. I think because I just make my room so hot in order to fall asleep, I'm using it a lot more than the average household. So I'm planning on bringing that number down. What was unaccounted for? Well, obviously there's some bigger appliances I couldn't get to. The outlets weren't accessible, and there's also like the water heating and devices that other people in my family were using. But overall, I think 16.5% is about what I was expecting to measure because I'm just one person in a four-person household. Thank you for listening. If you want to make any of these same comparisons, here are my sources, and have a good day.